Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk about concept art. What is its real purpose and how do we as concept artists create this kind of work? What are we thinking about and why would a film and TV production use it, and the various areas in which that might be used and at the different stages along in the production that it's used as well. Because concept art isn't just about making stuff look cool, although we do try to do that. It's not always about that. So let's get to it. I'm going to talk about concept art as it relates to the film and TV industry. I don't have any experience in the games industry, although I'm pretty sure I could extrapolate some crossover and have a pretty good idea of how it's used and where it's used, mostly because I've seen, the art of books of certain games and so on. So I know there's massive crossover between the film and TV industry and games industries. Where it differs heavily, of course, is in things such as when we're designing for film and TV or for a set or a location that takes place in the real world, and there are real world ramifications of certain designs. And that's the major difference, is that there's no real world consequence for a computer game because everything's being built in 3D. It's all virtual. Whereas the film industry, you may have to transport, goods and materials and so on across countries or across the world. There are physical, logistical problems that need to be solved, and that's where concept art is used a little bit differently in the film and TV industry. And we'll cover some of that as we go. Brief history. Concept art, or the term concept art, I think, don't quote me on this, I think was coined probably somewhere around the making of the Star Wars movies, the original Star Wars movies, when the art of Star Wars and Empire and Return of the Jedi came out, that sort of time frame, and then into the 80s, I suppose. What we now call concept art used to be just called production art. Guys like Ralph McQuarrie, Sid Mead, back in the day, past illustrators in their life. They were working as illustrators, not so much as film artists. They were illustrators, and they were hired by the film industry to create art and ideas and concepts. And that's where Lucas brought Ralph McQuarrie on to design those very early famous images of the Star Wars characters and scenes. But back in those days, it was pretty much just called production art. So if you hear production art, you hear concept art, it's pretty much the same thing. So on that front, concept art is essentially, or can be broken down into four categories. Character, I'm going to throw costume in there, but that's a different department. It's its own unique department. For games industry, those two would be part of the same thing, I suppose. Sets or locations, props, and vehicles. It's pretty much those broad categories of what concept art is used to design in any one of those areas. That term, working document, is in a nutshell pretty much what concept art really is. There's so many factors that go into film and TV production. The logistics of will just, it'll do your head in. Concept art allows the art department to plan ahead as best they possibly can to allow for all those things. So they can look at a piece of art and say, right, that building, that structure, it's going to be built on location. What do we build it out of? How long will it take? How many hours will it take to create that structure? And that's one of the key reasons that concept art exists. It isn't just to say, oh, look how pretty this shot will be. There is that too. But at the end of the day, it has a deeply, deeply practical purpose. And that's to inform many other departments from pre-production. It goes into the production phase, and concept art can continue through that, all the way through to post-production visual effects. And so you've got the concept art created in pre-production that can inform post-production visual effects, or concept art that is created during the visual effects phase by visual effects practitioners for their own purposes. So it runs all the way through. I've been brought onto film projects at the very, very beginning stages, at the blue sky phase, where it might be just a director and a couple of artists, all the way through to starting work on Alien Covenant, for example, where That production had been going for a year or more in Canada before it actually transitioned to Australia. A lot of the basic designs had already been taken care of, and so it was a different phase of concept art that was needed, all the way through to visual effects concept art. One of my first concept art jobs was working on Superman Returns for visual effects. So lots of the major design had been done, and I was really pretty much just tail end of that project. From here, I want to do some screenshots and show you examples of some of the concept art that I've created over the years that highlights some of the major differences and why certain concept art was created and what those reasons were. And I think you'll find that quite fascinating and interesting, I hope. Okay, so what you see here is an image that was provided by the production designer. This is the Wolverine in 2012. If you're familiar with the story, there's a scene that takes place in this capsule hotel, which doubles as a love hotel for the characters. At the time that this photograph was taken, the production was given permission to shoot on location at the hotel, at least the exteriors, not so much inside, because it's a private, I think they're private dwellings. But they were given permission to shoot exteriors in this region. It's in Japan, it kind of makes sense. This was what I created as the concept art from that photograph. I'll just flick backwards and forwards. So I was given this. The job was to turn it into a nighttime scene and extend it out and give it some color. I think about a month or so after I created this piece of work, the permission from the local authorities was removed, and they had to rethink this. They decided to look for a place in Sydney because some of the production was being shot here in Sydney, Australia, and they needed to find an alternative. And they were going to substitute this particular building right here for the Love Hotel. And this is what I had to create. So this was a perfect example of the production not being able to shoot where they wanted to shoot, and then having to rethink this and think, okay, if we need to replace the Love Hotel and we want to use that capsule hotel design, and we need to shoot this in Sydney, how is this going to look? Visual effects, post-production can look at this scene and say, right, we need to do, when we get live action, we need to replace the building that was there with a Love Hotel, with a capsule hotel. So there needs to be tracking involved and all that sort of thing, and they need to figure out how they're going to accomplish that. So this is a great example of two different pieces of concept art, a second piece that was having to be created purely because local authorities in Tokyo recounted their permission for the production to shoot. This is one example of Ridley Scott and the production were in New Zealand looking for locations. One of the things they wanted was for us concept artists to paint over some of the location photos that they'd sent back. And we were given a bunch of images each, and we had to basically paint over them really, really quickly. And then they were emailed back directly to Ridley Scott and Co. And that was for them to make decisions as to whether they were going to choose these locations and set up base in New Zealand and say, yes, this is it. Here's another one. And that's the paint over, or real quick sort of paint over. And as you can see, I'm adding, atmosphere and mist and adding trees in really, really quickly. So this is really quick photo bash stuff. That's another one sent from, this might be a producer or a location guy, and then a quick paint over. So we did tons of these, and that was enough for them to make the decisions that they required to shoot on location in New Zealand, as opposed to another country or another place. Here is an example of a shot from Foundation. This is a location they were thinking of shooting in, and they wanted to use this portion and have, actors and so on walk around this area. Not that this was a shot planned. This wasn't an exact shot. This was more of we're thinking of shooting in this particular building in this area. And this might be some example of what would we put out here? What would we shoot or include or composite back into this area here? And that was my solution. The purpose was really just to get the overall sorted out and figure that out. So that is pretty much the painting without that foreground. We'll call it a live action photograph. So then I, cut a piece of this out and extended that out and made a new version of that, and then created a whole new version that extended out beyond that building. So there's some level of, connection to like these shapes here, there's a level of connection to this building and to this part here, so there's repetition and it blends into that naturally. It's an old matte painter's trick. And then into this whole, Trantor city background, into these other buildings and walkways and all sorts of stuff going on here. And then, this sort of slightly foreground structure with a doorway that maybe leads into some sort of elevator there, and it's some kind of maintenance access shaft, who knows. Here is the next one. This is based on the same building and same location in Berlin, just from a different point of view. Using this structure, what would this look like? Well, the first thing I had to do was to remove everything we didn't want and then create an entirely different background for it. But yeah, so this is a classic example, or another example of that process of production wanting to know, if we shoot here, what will that look like? Is this a viable location? Is it cost effective? Can we afford it? How long will it take? And so that's where concept art helps other people make those decisions. This was going to be a marketplace. Now this particular photograph here is of a fort, an old disused fort in Malta. Here's another shot. So this is from one end. That first shot was taken from down here, someplace down at that area, right there. This shot here is taken from the opposite side. So using these two photographs, or actually I think I had a couple more photographs to work with, I then went ahead and built, or rebuilt I should say, the entire fort in Maya. I used a aerial shot from Google Earth or Google Maps to get the broad strokes, dimensions of the structure, which allow me to place, large shaped blocks to kind of vaguely map out the space, and then basically photogrammetry to rebuild all of this as close to scale as I could possibly get it. So the tan colored 3D here is the original fort, and the blue is my idea to extend that into a second level and built into for the purposes of the scene. And I've started to populate with stalls because it's a market scene. The Disney sector, I think it was called. So again, the tan is everything that exists. And then once it was all built and structured, I could place my camera, my 3D camera, my viewpoint that I wanted to use to describe the scene any way I wanted to. That became that. So we ended up adding all these single habitat boxes here with these windows. So these are like really cheap, living accommodations. Here's a hyperloop. So there's an entrance which doesn't go anywhere, it just goes into a brick wall over here. But the idea was that there would be this entrance and people would come and go down to a hyperloop station. There's another hyperloop vehicle up here that whoosh, shoots upwards, and you have to do the sound effects, otherwise it doesn't work. More of these sort of capsule hotel pod things, like these guys here. So there's a bar here, and you could sort of walk into the barrier and sort of like the cone of silence, I think. Just different shops and stalls and fruit and veg and so on. So that's the final. So it was all of, and obviously background and cityscape up here. And so all of that work was for the purposes of allowing production to decide whether they were going to shoot in this place or not, whether it would be viable or not. In the end, they did not. They went with another location in a university campus. Here is one of the obvious examples of visual effects concept art. So this is obviously being created certainly after the live footage has been created. As you can see here's the film crew, a couple of the actors walking down this platform here in these steps. My goal or my job is to then place them into the overall scene. So this gives the visual effects guys some idea of what they need to do, what has to take place, and where this fits in to the overall. So there's that little section of live action just here. So perfect example of post-production concept art. Here's another example, cathedral. As you can see, there's a small section of the build here, actors, and then the extension of that into a final shot, or what would be a final shot. So it's the extension of the structure on the rooftop and the valley and the buildings and trees and so on, and rivers and rain and all that sort of thing. is another example. Some of the post-production visual effects concept art, and it gives the visual effects guys some idea of where to take it. Ghostbusters, Afterlife. This is another side of concept art that is a little bit different in that you start with photographic material or images that have been provided to you, in this case by obviously production or location people or production designer, and you get asked to embellish that photograph because they may actually just shoot right there in that spot. So this was a really cool one. So as you can see, holes that the ghost have been eating, chomping through these big wheels, these big chunk coming out here, and it's slime that's melted or eaten away that metal. Added some texture, sense of light streaming through, signage over here, corrugated iron across the window there, shafts of light coming through, chains hanging down, moisture and water on the ground, pipes and hoses, stuff, junk. The next one was very similar, so I had to camera match and then build 3D and also make sure I've got the scale of objects the right size to match the figures. And that's they wanted sort of a walkway that they could put characters on, pipes being eaten in half, some of these tanks placed in here. This is another example of working into an existing photo, so I didn't have to do this from scratch. I just had to play with it, and that's sometimes really fun and also relaxing and kind of easy. It's a different mindset, it's a different way to work. It means you don't have to think about everything that needs to go in here because it's already there. You're just adding to it. You're just bringing it along and pushing it a little further. And I used to work in a factory, kind of like this, for several years. So for me, I dig this, completely dig this. I love it. Blue sky phase. This is either terrifying or exciting, or a combination of the both, because exciting in that you've got open slather. You're inventing from nothing. There's no predetermined designs yet. You've just chance to explore, have fun, invent new things, come up with the environment in the world, and just go crazy. Practicalities will soon come in and they'll say, okay, we can and can't do this. But for the time being, play, just go crazy. Before I got to these paintings here, I did those pencil sketches that you saw, and that was part of that fun process, that fun phase of exploring. And I could just sit down and I could literally sit in a cafe and sketch anywhere I wanted to. I wasn't limited to sitting in front of the computer. I could have sketched in gouache. I could have even done little oil painting studies. Who knows? It would have been completely up to me. So this was cool. This was a lot of fun. I also worked on the second Maze Runner film, The Scorched Trials. Like some of the other concept art that I've already shown you guys, none of these were location specific. In other words, this was just more about what that world looked like. Just go to town. So it's just nothing but our imagination and what we'd like to see in this world. Again, blue sky, everything's open. It's more of a look and feel, and what is the visual character of the film likely to be? The production doesn't have to go down this path. If they say, yes, we want to create something like this in here, then they start to figure out the logistics of that. But that's way off. That's way down the track. All right. Well, I think that's enough for this video. There's a few examples of concept art used in a couple of different applications. I hope that's clarified how concept art is used for those who are interested, younger artists that are looking to become concept artists and wanting to know a little bit more about how this works, particularly for film and TV industries. Thanks very much for watching. If you have any requests for future videos, drop a comment below. In the meantime, happy painting. See you next time.